challenge with that is that from the church's perspective, if you look at the ordination vows, the church calls us to be patient teachers, wise counselors, and
model our life. And Jesus wasn't going 180% all the time, quite honestly.
No, Jesus regularly said to his disciples, I'm going to retreat and go spend time praying with God. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be in communion with God. You guys need to go out and do the work and let me know how it goes.
Hi, my name is Ariane Rice, and welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think. Today, I am in conversation with my colleague, Luke Jernagan, who, as you just heard, is speaking to a very real challenge many priests and many people face. Exhaustion. Whether you are in ministry or not, I imagine you can relate. It's like we're all in on this secret that we know we are too busy. We know we are overscheduled. We know we say yes to just too many things, but we keep doing it. Why? Because it's hard to say no. It's hard to be with ourselves. It's hard to live accepting our limitations. It's so much easier to keep reinforcing that wiring that we can run at 180% all the time. What I love about this conversation and the ones that are coming up in the next couple weeks is that I'm talking with other clergy who have stepped away from full-time ministry in a congregational setting. They found work outside the church that allows them to live more fully into the vows they made when they became priests. Work that aligns with their values and supports them emotionally, physically, spiritually. One of the ordination vows I return to again and again, now and then when I was working in the church, was I was supposed to live a life that reflects what you believe, which is a core value of leadership, regardless of a faith tradition. But here's the thing, I can't do it when I'm exhausted, when I am disconnected from the core of who I am. As a priest and a coach, I just feel this is where my work overlaps, because both are about cultivating inner capacities, learning how to be a person who is more comfortable with discomfort, because prioritizing love, compassion, patience, kindness for oneself first is the only way in which that can be shared with others. That's the work of thinking about our feelings and recognizing when we are out of alignment and giving ourselves permission to make space, to reach out and connect with others, or simply to rest, go for a walk, and reconnect with the source of our energy and purpose and what makes us come alive. Luke and I dive into this tension and what it means to lead and live authentically. Okay, I am so glad you are here for this conversation. So now let's get to it.
Hi there, Luke Jernagan.
Hi, Ariane.
I keep trying to come up with a better way to start, and I don't know what else to say, but hi.
Hi.
Oh, it's really great seeing you and reconnecting with you after many years. And I am going to just invite you right off the bat to please introduce yourself and say a little bit about who you are and how you live your vocation in the world these days.
My name's Luke Jernagan. You and I have known each other 20 years?
16, 20, yeah, a lot.
Close, pretty close. I live in St. Louis with my wife and 3 kids. My wife, Hopi, and I are both Episcopal priests. We met in seminary. You were a part of that, as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
I was a parish priest for 15 years and stepped down in 2020 in February. And now my career took a very unexpected turn, and I now work in something called a multifamily office, which is registered investment advisor, investment firm. All of our clients are multi-generational families, and I'm the director of family culture and learning. So I help families learn how to communicate together, define their shared values and vision, and engage in philanthropy and a lot of other endeavors. So to me, it feels very much like pastoral care, but in a very different dimension.
So very different. I already have so many questions. And before I just start asking them, how would you tell a story about how you got to where you are right now? How would you tell that story?
That's a long story.
So, I know. So I'm going to let you figure out how to edit it.
All right. We will figure out how to edit this. Why don't I start with making the decision to step away from parish ministry?
Great.
And then we can talk about the interim time, that very loosey-goosey interim time that also coincided with the COVID lockdown, and then how I got to where I am now. So going way, way back, I knew I wanted to be an Episcopal priest when I was 15. Mm. And it was a very clear calling. I'd always been active in the church. It was a very important component in my family's life. I'd been acolyting since I was a kid. My sister, who was 12 years older than me, she and my brother-in-law were the leaders of the youth group where all my friends went. Then my sister was the parish secretary at our church. She still is.
Oh my gosh.
30 years later. And that's all I wanted to do. So I went to college, majored in marketing, because I figured that for two reasons. One was the priest at my church says, don't go to a public university and major in religion. And said, you're going to get plenty of that in seminary, so do something different. And I figured that marketing is evangelism, and churches have quite a bit of structure and a corporate structure to them that I ought to know. So I majored in business and marketing, went straight from college to seminary, and I was ordained when I was 25, which ought to be illegal.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Or at least for me. Some other people.
No, I'm with you there.
Became ordained at 25, served at a variety of churches. The two where I was the longest was Christ Church in Ponte Vedra Beach, which is like an Episcopal megachurch. And it was awesome. I was one of 6 full-time clergy on staff. Everybody else had been a rector before. And it was like a giant laboratory surrounded by mentors who I really cared about. And in fact, I still have a picture on my desk at home of those other clergy and I. And it was like Eden. It was so much fun.
Can I just pause there for a minute? Yeah. Because there's already stuff I want to ask about the first part of the story. But
yeah.
One of the things I'm assuming when you say it was like Eden, it was so much fun, is because you were part of not just a faith community, but you had a community of colleagues.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time, the rector of the church told me, these are going to be the best years of your ministry. I was like, no, they won't. You don't know what you're talking about. And looking back, man, those were fun times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so great not being in charge.
Oh, it was great not being in charge. But then I got to do fun stuff. Like we had a preschool with 150 kids. And every Tuesday I got to go be the chaplain and give the Bible study at the preschool.
Oh, we have that in common. It's truly
oh my God, it was like the best thing ever. I could be like goofy and they loved it. And every time they would see me like at Target or something, like shopping, which blew their minds that they didn't think I ever left the church. They'd come give me hugs. And it was just best thing ever. Now they're all in college.
Don't you think those of us who are called to clergy, there's something about being a clergy person, particularly when you get to do things like chapel and work with kids, where you really actually love being a kid and you love having permission to be a silly adult with kids.
Yeah.
Oh, It's the best.
It's really fun.
All right. I want to go back and ask a question around that 15-year-old self who was so definitive and clear in what it was they wanted to do. At this point in your life, when you think about that, what was it about the job that so spoke to you? What was it you wanted to do? Like you say, you wanted to be a priest, but what did that mean to you then?
I think that around that time, my family life was really tough. And the clergy were like the people that I could really trust and rely on. Mm. And the church was always just like a very safe place, but it was also an inspiring place. And I would go and have meaning and community and all these things that in my 15-year-old mind, I could not articulate, really understand. And a lot of it I could not articulate until I went to seminary. Oh, this is what we're supposed to be doing. But I think I felt this need to give back and to contribute to the source that had contributed so much to my life. Mm-hmm. I think that was it.
Yeah. I hear this often from us. And in my own story, I think about it as church was a place where I really felt seen. Like I felt seen by God, quite honestly. I felt seen and loved and worthy of belonging. And then I felt seen by people who I respected.
I also think there's a big difference between community and communion. Mm. And there are plenty of places where we find community, like at our gym, the group of people I see every time I go to the coffee shop, colleagues at work, whatever it is. Communion's a deeper thing. And I think that then I was experiencing communion, whether it's with God and it's with other people who are seeking that deeper relationship with God. And one of the things I remember articulating when I was going through the discernment process was that when I went to church on Sunday morning, there were adults that I'd seen there every single Sunday, like of my childhood, and I still had no idea who they were. But I appreciated that older bald guy who sat 5 rows back on the left side was always going to be there. Mm-hmm. There was something very comforting about that.
And I think those of us who also come into church maybe from backgrounds or family lives that are a little more chaotic, it is really reassuring to have this rhythm of a community that is, and the intergenerationality of it is, I think, one of the best gifts church brings into the world for sure.
And one of the best gifts of ministry.
Yes.
How many other roles do you have where you can be genuine friends with people of every age? Mm-hmm.
Yep. There have been some op-eds actually in the Washington Post and the New York Times in the last couple of years that speak pointedly to that, because experience tends to have a lot of wisdom and it's good to be around it.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's fade out, fade in and get to, you decided to leave this incredibly fun group of colleagues in a lab because maybe you wanted to be a boss. I don't know. You tell me.
So again, it was for my rationale at the time was, yes, I did want to be the rector of a church. That was always the calling. But also I felt like it was such a unique gift to be part of a very healthy church culture and to learn what that meant, how you implement it, how you create it, nurture it, cultivate it. And I felt like I really wanted to go find a place where I could replicate this. And the church where I ended up going to, I went because there was some connection, was in the Diocese of Missouri, where my wife, Hopi, had been sponsored for ordination. The Bishop of Missouri had married us. She still had some family in the area. So there were multiple connecting points that drew us to this place. But what really got me excited about it was that when the search committee talked to me, they were really honest and said, we are at an inflection point, and the church is either just going to be a small little chapel for baptisms, weddings, and funerals, and a simple Sunday service for the community, or it could be a really dynamic congregation like for the city. And they said, we know which way we want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like catnip to me.
Mm-hmm.
This is it. That's what I want to do. So they had the openness to take some real risks, like hiring or calling a 32-year-old rector.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the experience of having been in this incredible congregation with so many just unique experiences and lots of trial and error and like kind of nurturing and confidence building that community uniquely gave. So I was looking for that combination. So I came to St. Peter's in Ladue, in this great suburb of St. Louis, and almost out of the gate, like we hit the ground running. And I mean, it was like the best experience you could have.
Can you say a little bit about, I think there's a very unique energy that a person brings when they're coming into a church in a senior leadership position and it's their first one, because I think I gave like 180% of myself to that role the first few years. Can you talk about that? Both like the adrenaline joy of it and also maybe sometimes what's not great about it.
Yeah. So that 180%, I did that every year that I was there.
Mm.
And I had done it every year that I was at the church in Florida.
Mm.
And I've thought a lot about this. Part of the reason was that seeing results that are almost immediate is very alluring and it feels really good. And when you start giving that much of yourself, the congregation is very willing to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, thanks, we appreciate it, but they're willing to accept it. And it's a really hard balance between finding the right pace, which I did not, and starting out that way so that, to use the tired metaphor, you're able to run a marathon, but not the sprint.
Mm-hmm.
And I just sprinted until I keeled over.
What would you say is part of your learning around why you had to go through that?
I think what I've learned a few things. We can discuss it from the personal angle and the wider church.
I'd love the personal first.
Okay. The personal for me is that I think that's always been my speed.
Mm.
My wife and really close friends make fun of me relentlessly for the pace I walk down the sidewalk. And when we go on vacation, I want to do every activity. And I have a lot of fun doing that. It's really great. And at the end, I sometimes come home tired. Mm-hmm. But I've got to do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that it's just how I'm wired, and it's who I am. Challenge with that is that from the church's perspective, if you look at the ordination vows, the church calls us to be, what is it that's in the ordination ceremony? Patient teachers, wise counselors, and
model our life. And Jesus wasn't going 180% all the time, quite honestly.
No, Jesus regularly said to his disciples, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I'm going to retreat and go spend time praying with God. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be in communion with God. You guys need to go out and do the work and let me know how it goes. Mm-hmm. So ordination vows state that. Scripture states that. Liturgy states that. We talk about how Sabbath was not a suggestion. It was a commandment. Mm-hmm. Like top 10, don't kill anybody, take every seventh day off. Like, pretty big deal.
Yep.
But we don't follow it in the church. And the church never had a Sabbath. like there was something going on 7 days a week. And if you look at the difference between the ordination vows and the standard diocesan or parish contract with the rector, they're very different.
Mm-hmm.
The contract says we need a fundraiser, we need a preacher, we need an organization builder, we need a head of staff, we need somebody to manage the budget and manage crises when they come up. So you need all of those different things, and you need to be present and build the community and nurture the community. And in a place like St. Peter's, where it's in a very affluent neighborhood, most of our parishioners were the heads of businesses or different organizations. And what I learned is that we can build out all the staff we want. People really respond to the rector. They want the rector to do the weddings, the burials, the baptisms.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not the rector showing up, it doesn't really count.
Mm-hmm.
And we tried really hard to offset that and had a little movement, but not much. So one of the things I've learned in retrospect, and I'm fast forwarding to the end of the story, but I'm back at St. Peter's as a priest associate, which has been a wonderful gift. So a few weeks ago, I was preaching there and I had time between the two services. And I went back and looked at all of the baptism, burial, and wedding books because there was somebody whose burial I'd done and I couldn't remember when it was, and I just wanted to look. So, Ariane, long story short, I was looking at the dates, and there was one 3-day period in 2008, where in a 3-day period, I had done 2 services where each one had over 500 people in attendance. Two burials.
Wow.
2 burials.
Right.
A wedding on Saturday night and baptisms on Sunday. And I look back at that and I'm like, and I don't remember any of it. Like it's all blurred to me.
Right. I know of what you speak, and you also did it because I know that job, right? So you did it with different congregations in truth too. It's not like you did all that with the same congregation. When you do funerals, you're welcoming a whole new group of people into your space. And and I'm going to make an assumption about you that I know is true. You're putting your heart into all of that work. Okay. So tell me about what started to happen when you were like, this is not sustainable for me. I need to make a change. What was going on?
I think we averaged somewhere between 25 and 30 funerals or burials a year during my time at St. Peter's. Major transitions. And in 2018, it was our 150th anniversary. So we had the presiding bishop come for that big gala. And I thought 2 years beforehand, hey, if we've got this locked in, let's do a capital campaign.
Always got to get that capital campaign.
We had some major deferred maintenance at the church. We needed to fix that. We redesigned our parish hall and all of this kind of leading up to that big day. And it was the combination of all of that and leading the church and having all these pastoral responsibilities that really made me realize I can't sustain this.
And you had 3 young children. Were all 3 of your girls born by then?
3 young children. And during part of this, Hopi was also the executive director of a shelter for women recovering from prostitution and addiction.
Mm-hmm. I remember this well. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was bananas. Like we never should have taken that on. And to Hopi's credit, she stepped away from that role after 2 years because she being in that leadership position, me being in mine, 2 roles where we had emergencies popping up with frequency was not sustainable.
Right. So what surprised me when I remember when you, because of the social media stuff, shared that you were stepping away, but what resonated with me so much at the time is typically you read, oh, I'm stepping away and I'm going to go to this church. I'm stepping away. I'm going to go do this at a seminary or go do this particular job. But you were stepping away. And this was, I realized as you told me the date, on the brink of the pandemic. If it was February 2020, where you actually left, and you announced it the year prior, like towards the end of 2019, right? But you stepped away and said, I'm figuring it out. That takes some courage, and I'm sure also takes the ability, because I had to withstand people coming to you and saying things like, I don't understand. What are you doing? Mm-hmm. Or even the really passive aggressive, wow, I hope that works out for you. I loved that. That's the best. Not from my church. Not from my church. I want to be clear.
Yeah. So, 2018 was a busy year. And as stressful as it was for me, it was like a banner year in the life of the church. We did all these amazing things. Everything was firing on all cylinders. It felt so good. And I was scheduled for a sabbatical in 2019. And I went into the sabbatical thinking this is going to be my discernment time. And also, if it weren't for the sabbatical, I probably would have left the church earlier. But that was going to be my time to say, okay, I'm going to have this glorious gift of 3 months, and I'm going to step away. And my entire goal in this is going to be discerning what ministry means and how I live into it. So I went to Christ in the Desert Monastery in Abiquiu, New Mexico, which is extraordinary. And I went there like with this idea. Like I remember going to the church day one. I'm like, all right, God, you've got 6 days. All ears. There's no other sounds. I've got no kids. The phone doesn't work. God, it is me and you. Like, let's have a chat. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it was. On like day 3 or 4, I just had this incredible visceral feeling of, I would call it a divine shrug, that it was God saying, look, this congregation's been around 150 years. It's not about you.
Yeah.
Like, Holy Spirit's going to keep doing its thing there, whether you're there or not. Like, and it was, all I can say is I walked away from that place with a sense of peace and comfort, and also fear. So I was just going to let that keep simmering and just see what I felt. And by the end of the sabbatical, I was really at peace. And I came back and was talking with my bishop, who's just an amazing human being and somebody in whom I had complete trust. And what he said to me was, Luke, you don't owe the church anything. Mm. Like, if it's time for you to leave, then that is okay. Because I was still feeling an enormous amount of guilt. So he gave me the permission to make the decision. I made the announcement to the church, and I worked it out with the vestry. And I said, I'm willing to stay as long as it takes for you all to have a really smooth transition period. And we agreed that 3 months seemed like an appropriate time. So I made the announcement in, I think, October, and left the first weekend of February 2020. And then COVID happened. So I had been excited about this idea of taking an extended period of time to see what was out there. I didn't think the entire world was joining me that period of time, which was surreal. Mm-hmm. And Hopi, who had been so excited that I would be home more and to have more time with the kids, I don't think wanted me home that much
more. I wonder if you shared a little about that last Sunday with them. I know you're back now, which is pretty cool and pretty unique. I don't think that happens a lot.
It doesn't happen a lot.
Yeah. Which speaks, frankly, to the health of the relationship of the community and the health of the clergy and staff.
Yeah.
So kudos. Can you just say a little bit about that goodbye? Because it was incredibly powerful for me, and I'd love to hear about your experience.
So it was an interesting experience making the announcement and having 3 months to stay there because there were still things that I wanted to accomplish. And more than anything, because I put so much of myself into this community and I built amazing relationships. I cared for everybody. I wanted to see this place thrive. And that was my number one goal. Like, how do I leave here in the best possible way so that the church continues to do the wonderful work they were doing? So I put together this sermon series for my last 3 weeks. And I still think about it quite a bit. But it was basically, what are the most important things I want to tell them? I mean, it's almost like Moses on the mountain right before the Israelites are going without him into the promised land. Like, all right, this is it.
Mm-hmm.
So I preached maybe my 3 best sermons at St. Peter's.
Why were they your best?
I was pretty honest.
Yeah.
And not that I wasn't honest before, but I think as a rector, you have to be strategic.
Yep.
In what you say. Because to me, my philosophy of preaching is that preaching is primarily a pastoral exercise. Pastoral first, theological second. And so this was me as the pastor stating, here are the things I observed about this congregation over the past 7 years that I think are extraordinary. And I want to just show you who I think you really are as a community of God.
And I'm assuming, but let me check in. I bet you also told them how they had impacted you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is the reciprocity of being able to do that with people. That's legacy work. I think we talk in the leadership coaching world. And probably your world too, which I want to get into. That's around legacy and understanding what you want to leave behind, which is really important work for everybody to do. And it also, I think, models so well the importance of having certain conversations with people we love, because inevitably we will be saying goodbye. If there's anything that was one of the most unexpected gifts of my time in congregational ministry, it was actually walking that path of saying goodbye. So now talk a little bit about how you went from there to here. And what here is, because I heard philanthropy, I heard family and intergenerational, and I have a semblance idea of what this is, but I would love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. Anytime I'm in a social setting, somebody says, what do you do? I'm like, it's really great. And it's complicated. So one thing I'll say is, going back, when I left the church, in one way where it did not feel risky, is that there's so much demand for clergy within the church that I thought, if I go away and either have this rekindled calling to parish ministry, or I totally fail at everything else, like, I've built up enough wisdom, I think, over 15 years that I can always come back and find a place. I probably can't come back to St. Peter's, but I can come back into parish ministry. So that felt very comforting. Also, I'd spent years preaching to people about how ministry is much broader than the collar. You don't have to be ordained to be in ministry. So I have a really broad idea of how we live in communion with God on a daily basis, how we find ways to serve other people and make a difference in the world. For a year and a half, I threw 1,000 darts at the wall and almost on a weekly basis came home to Hopi with the great new idea of the thing I was going to do. And our family jokes about it today, but everybody was really supportive. Said, that sounds great. Go for it. And then I'd try. I'm like, I don't know if that's going to stick. And after about a year, a friend of mine in St. Louis sent me a job description that he had found for this multifamily office looking for a chief learning officer. I have no idea what that is, but I really like learning. Let's see what this is all about. And I reached out, and what I learned is family office, a multifamily office, is an investment arm for what we call families in the ultra high net worth world. So significant wealth. And multifamily office does everything from managing investments to what we call wealth planning and coordination, accounting, taxes, helping households pay bills and manage complexity. This, where I work now, it's called Matter Family Office, is really unique in the field, and that we have this third pillar called family culture and learning. And this is work that's starting to get more popular. But the idea is that families tend to maintain control of family businesses longer, maintain wealth longer when they communicate clearly. Everybody understands the role. They're not fighting. They stop and ask, okay, we've generated all this wealth. What is it for? If I don't need to work anymore, what do I do? And there are people asking really big, profound questions. And because of the success they've had in their careers, they have the ability to make a real difference in the lives of their employees, their families, the world beyond them. So that role really appealed to me. And another thing that had been a point of connection is that in my ministry, I think it's just the nature of the Episcopal Church. To me, the healthiest churches tend to be the ones in very affluent communities.
It's true, because there was a tradition in those families of supporting their congregation. And yes, that's a whole nother conversation, but there's usually a big disconnect between the clergy sometimes going into those congregations. Anyway, that's a whole separate topic, but so I totally agree with you.
But in my pastoral care, I often had multi-generational families where they were all parishioners in the church with significant wealth. And in some families, that brought them together. It created a cohesion, a link. There was mutual support, mutual care for each other. They tended to be very generous with the community. And it just really allowed them to thrive as a family. And in other families, you would see it where it would just completely divide them. And I wanted to be a part of helping families find the solution to thrive.
I remember, this is leading to a question. Before I did my quote unquote job search in seminary, I met with the canon. I can't remember which canon she was in the Diocese of New York at the time, but I felt like I was confessing to her that I was going to need to find a financially secure church, one that could pay well, quite frankly, because I was the breadwinner for my family. And I felt like I was confessing because I also felt that was a betrayal of my values, beliefs as a Christian and what I was supposed to do and how I was supposed to serve. And I so remember her saying to me, "Don't you think people with resources need God?" And I am certain different people in your life have raised this kind of issue of how can you be a priest and then serve in this context? So can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I'm going to say something that I believe that I hope sparks some broader conversation. But I think that money and wealth are morally neutral. And I think the Gospels, the New Testament, the Bible supports this. It is our relationship with it that becomes morally weighted. And I think that there are a lot of, let me back up. In my ministry, I have been in relationships with wonderful parishioners with significant wealth who were faithful, committed, kind, generous, absolutely living into their Christian values. And I've also been around people with no wealth at all who were the opposite.
Yeah.
So it says to me that the money and wealth is morally neutral, however much or however little we have. It is what we do with what we have that matters the most, I think, to God, to the world, to ourselves. And one of the things we talk about in my work with families is that we try to expand families' definition of wealth. Like there's financial wealth, but there's also, we say there's financial capital. There's also intellectual capital, human capital, the way we take care of our families and define who we are. There's social capital, like the way we live in the world around us and contribute to the betterment of our communities and society and country and world. So I would say the same is true for everybody, no matter how much money you have, is we need to all expand our understanding of wealth and think about how we make the most out of the gifts that we have.
So when I emailed with you, we talked about this conversation that we both feel needs to be had in the church regarding bivocational, multivocational clergy and the just reality. I think I saw the other day, a colleague of mine, Kathy Caimano, posted, and there are 7,000 congregations right now, and there are 5,000 active clergy. So what do you think it says? Because I'm definitely seeing more where we know we have an incredible skill set that's of value because we have worn a lot of hats. And we're like, we can't do this congregation thing anymore. And I think it didn't used to always be that we had to wear so many hats, quite honestly. So what do you think? There's something, what's happening here? What's happening here in your opinion?
All right, Ariane, just invite me to stand on my soapbox. That's basically what you've just done. All right, so I'll go back to talking about my sister, who's been a parish secretary in the same church for 30 years. I think she started in 1995 or 96. When I was struggling in my ministry with the pace, I remember vividly a conversation we had, and I asked her, what have you seen change in the church? And she said, when she started at Christ Church in Pensacola, Matt Curran was the rector. He had been the rector for 35 years. The rector before him had been there, I think, 40. Wow. So the church had 2 priests in 75 years. Matt was beloved, mentor of mine, wonderful human being. She said that was before email. There was no texting. Nobody had really had cell phones yet. So she said if somebody wanted his attention, they had to write a letter or schedule a time to sit down with him, which required effort. Mm-hmm. And they were only going to take that time if it was important. And she said, today, half the congregation has the rector's cell phone number. Mm-hmm. Everybody has his email address. They're like, they can text or email about anything, important or not, at any time of day. And there's this access that was never there before. So that's a major thing that has changed, is that clergy are always on. The other thing that has changed is that a lot of churches are still trying to be the church of the 1990s with the 2020s budget. Meaning that was back in the day when everything was healthy. Clergy were, like, if you looked at their salaries based on the broader market, they were being compensated enough. They could live in a nice neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Kids went to school. They could afford college, and they lived a relatively balanced life. Today, on average, clergy of every denomination are being asked to do more with less. The congregation has less resources. They're being paid less. There's a caveat to this. Clergy salaries have not gone up significantly, but the cost of healthcare is risen so much that if you look broadly, what congregations are paying toward compensation, it's risen quite a bit. Less of it is actually going into the priest's pocket.
Exactly.
So what you're seeing is, it used to be the clergy person tended to be the sole earner in the family. Now they're more likely than not earning as much as their spouse. So it tends to be if the spouse is making more income, that that job or that career tends to dominate what happens with the family. But going back to my original point of clergy being asked to do more with less, I remember having a conversation with one of our colleagues who was the canon of the ordinary in his diocese. Meaning, the canon of the ordinary is the person, if you're watching or listening to this podcast and you're not churchy, the assistant to the bishop who has to deal with all the problems. And I remember talking to this person because that year we had a handful of seminary classmates who made some really bad decisions and got in trouble, whether it was legal trouble or kind of moral trouble or whatever. I remember asking him, what's happening? And he said, I think everybody is so close to the edge in terms of stress, like wondering how they're going to pay the bills, wondering how they're taking care of the family, taking care of churches where they may not be appreciated. And he said, I think with that level of stress coming from so many different areas, it really just takes one incident to put people over the line and they just can't take anymore and end up messing up in some big way.
Yep. 100%. Luke, I've never heard these particular reasons articulated in this way. And what I really love about them is a word I use a lot outside the church in my work is operationalize. We may have our values. We may have the ways in which we want people to be, we want to be, but if we don't operationalize them into behaviors, then who cares, right? And so that's what I just heard. You're talking about the operational reality of the church and the landscape, particularly around healthcare. That was the craw that often got the most discussion points in the leadership board meetings of the church. Why do we have to pay for the Episcopal Church's healthcare? Why can't we go to the open market? And when you are working in congregations where there are people who are very highly experienced professionals in the capitalist world we live in, it's really difficult to speak to it and have to speak to it as also the pastor and preacher and presider on Sunday mornings. So I think clergy are also just put in a very difficult spot around that.
They are. So here we are in this place where clergy are being asked to do more with less. And we have the broader stress that I think every clergy person feels that churches are in decline. Not just the Episcopal Church,
right,
but all of them. And being the priest in the parish, you're on the forefront of this, regularly being asked, like, how do I get more people in the pews? How do I change this? And it is another layer of, or another weight of complexity and anxiety. So you have all of that. And then a lot of clergy are looking at the open market saying, okay, I could keep doing this for 25 more years, 30 more years, or I could live my ministry in this other context where more likely than not, you're going to get paid more and work less.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, two of those stressors come down. Creates more family balance, creates less anxiety, or lowers the anxiety. And you can't fault people for wanting to do that.
No, you cannot.
And I think that going back to there's 7,000 churches and 5,000 clergy, we don't need 7,000 churches.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've got to find more creative ways of being the church. And I think that the church's structures, dioceses, vestries, need to take a really careful look at the state of ministry today. Because now, as more people have the opportunity to go into ministry from another career, or let me rephrase this. Over the past 30 years, more and more clergy have been stepping into the priesthood from another career.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we're making it less marketable for people of deep faith and calling to do that.
That's right. One of the aspects, too, of working outside the church, not only do you have less of those anxieties because everything isn't on your shoulders, but you're able to actually, I feel like, do more ministry because you're working in a human growth domain around spirituality. You don't even use religious speak. You don't even use spiritual words, but growth mindset, as far as I'm concerned, is completely in line with my theological belief. Communication in a family. Like, how many times is that talked about in our faith?
Right. Yeah. I think there are so many ways to live in a ministry. And my wife right now is a college chaplain. Like, that ministry looks drastically different from parish ministry. She's having a ball.
Yeah.
And it's like part-time. And she's having a blast. And I've said to her, like, why not go full-time? She's like, why would I do that? I'm enjoying this.
One of the things I'm hearing from you in this kind of narrative through your life and your calling, wow, that 15-year-old had no idea how glorious it was going to be. Because you can't even imagine the reality of moving towards something. And then if somebody had told you at 15, oh, actually, this is what you're going to be doing at whatever age you are now, you would have been like, oh, I don't want to do that because I'm going to do this thing. So just what is it that you're just like, wow, I can't believe the gift I've been given in this life God has helped me create?
There's a really great book by Paul Ladue called The Moral Imagination. Without knowing it, he describes the concept of the Holy Spirit, because he says you can be really focused in life on what you want to do and like what your purpose is and what your job is or family or whatever. But he said, always pay attention to the periphery. He said, you never know what's going to come out of the periphery, meaning something you've never thought about, you never knew, but suddenly it comes in your life and it makes total sense. And to me, that's the Holy Spirit. We can always do our absolute best to follow God and follow all the rules and everything, but something's going to come out and we're going to be, oh, that's the thing. So I think for my 15-year-old self, I'd go back and say, trust in that. And there have been times, going back to something you said earlier about how people treated you when you left your parish.
Mm-hmm.
There have definitely been times since I've left that I've felt immense guilt or questioned whether that was the right thing to do. But then I stop and have conversations like this and think, like, how great is this? That you're open to where God is working in the world. And I feel, for people who feel like I left ministry or the church, doesn't feel that way to me. And on a part-time basis, I still administer the sacraments, preach, and do that. But on a daily basis, I get to work with an awesome team of people. And we're building something new and creative and something I really believe in, and get to have a relationship with these incredible families. To me, it feels just like the church.
I love that, because I love it, because it's not a building. It's not about a building.
Yeah.
We're God's fields. Build people up in love.
Yeah, it's never about the building.
Nope. No matter how much we fixate on those capital campaigns. Well, Luke, this has been a joy and a treat. And I always ask people, anything you want to point them towards in your life? I know you're on LinkedIn. People can connect with you there. You haven't written a book that I don't know of, right?
I haven't written a book. I have an outline for a book right now.
Excellent. Let's get going.
Talk to a few people about it.
Nice.
I've got to get cracking. Yeah, so stay tuned.
Okay. I'll have you back out when it's published. Okay.
Excellent.
All right. Take good care.
All right. Bye, Ariane.